March 31st, 2013, Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods hit theaters in Japan, and we were officially introduced to two new characters, Beerus and Whis. And since then, Whis has been proven to be an absolute menace on the battlefield and has become a mentor to Goku and Vegeta as the series progressed. But how well do you really know Whis, and what is the real story behind Toriyama, Whis, and the Angels? Today, we're going to delve deep into that and talk about Whis, his role in the story, where he comes from, and the truth, the honest truth about the reason why he exists. Welcome to Dragon Ball X Saiyuki, which is the series here on the channel where we examine the roots of Dragon Ball based on Journey to the West. And as always, I'm joined by Jordan the Dragon Lee, and today we're talking about Whis, who, believe it or not, Whis is actually not inspired by the Monkey King. There's a lot more to him than meets the eye. So, Jordan, what's up with Whis, man? Tell me about it.
Well, I'm sure your audience is familiar with the devil and angel motif, the angel on your shoulder and the devil on your shoulder. Well, in Journey to the West, they have their own version of that. And Sun Wukong is essentially the devil on your shoulder. He is a representation of what's known as the monkey mind. And Tripitaka, the main character, the actual main character of the Journey to the West, he's essentially he's a representation of your Buddha nature, which would be the same thing as the angel on your shoulder, right? So, Whis and Beerus are their own versions of this concept. They are essentially a representation of yin and yang in the same way as an angel or a devil or Tripitaka or Sun Wukong. And, you know, Journey to the West is not just a story about a monkey with a stick. It has very deep psychological and spiritual themes. Dragon Ball does the exact same thing. It plays on very deep narrative themes. And so what Beerus and Whis represent are the extremes of two different philosophies of martial arts. Now, one of the philosophies is essentially the philosophy of taking advantage of your ego in combat. But classical Chinese martial arts is the exact opposite. They believe that you should not implement your ego at all. As a matter of fact, you should abandon it, and you should just master the ability to act without your ego. So Bruce Lee, his thing was that he closed the gap between these two concepts, and he created a form of martial arts that implemented the yin and the yang, rather than just the two separate parts. And you'll notice that Whis, anytime he fights, he has a very classical Chinese style martial arts stance, and the movements that he uses are very, very similar to what you would see in a lot of classical Chinese kung fu films. He is a representation of classical Chinese martial arts.
And one of the first videos that we did together, one of the first ones we did was about Vegeta's link to Beerus and why Ultra Ego and God Destruction powers fit him. And so here, it's sort of like the other side. Like, there's a reason as to why Vegeta and Beerus work well together and why Goku and Whis work well together, because they're both representations of the different sides of Journey to the West message.
That's right, that's right. So essentially, Beerus implements Sun Wukong's personal enlightenment at the beginning of the story when he had no control. He was just implementing Taoism to be this all-powerful, rebellious god. Whereas at the end of the story, when he becomes the victorious fighting Buddha, he is much more reminiscent of what you would see true Ultra Instinct as, where he's just allowing his ego to do its thing, but keeping control of his mind. Now, one really interesting thing to note is that Tripitaka, the main character of the Journey to the West, and Buddha, their goal was to lead Sun Wukong to enlightenment. It was to change him. It was to essentially lead him to Buddhahood or nirvana. And what's really interesting about that is that Whis and the Angel's goal is to teach the gods of destruction Ultra Instinct and to essentially control their ego and not allow them to use their all-powerful ego, their all-powerful destructive nature to completely destroy the universe. Because Sun Wukong, he had the capability to also destroy the entire universe, and the reason he wore his iconic crown was because any time he went too crazy and he started to destroy everything around him, his master would use an incantation to tighten the headband around his head, and it would cause him to cease, and he wouldn't be able to destroy everything around him. He was so powerful that he threatened to destroy the universe itself. So the relationship that Whis and Beerus have is very, very, very reminiscent of the relationship that Sun Wukong and his master had. You can see this symbolism, like even Whis' staff. Tripitaka carried a staff around that was very reminiscent of the staff that the angels all keep. Now, something else you'll notice as you're reading the manga is that Whis uses the term body a lot, and Beerus uses the term mind a lot, and that is because these two characters are body and mind themed characters, much like Goku and Vegeta, which is why they have different training methods, different ways of doing things as martial artists, is because they are both themselves a representation of the body and the mind. And in order to correctly use martial arts, you have to harmonize the body and the mind. So together, Beerus and Whis are sort of a representation of the balance that Goku and Vegeta both have to balance in order to become master martial artists. We are actually seeing this firsthand in the Dragon Ball Superhero events. Goku has always used meditation to keep his heart calm, so that way his body can move more efficiently. Whereas Vegeta, he's using meditation to essentially think and think and think and think to the point that he imprints movements into his mind, and so he can practice those afterwards and use those to imprint the moves that he's imprinted into his mind into his body. And that's essentially what Goku needs to do himself in order to maintain balance, is he needs to start implementing thinking and thinking and thinking about moves until they are ingrained into his mind, and then practice ingraining them into his body, so that way he can use Ultra Instinct and Base. So both of the characters are mastering essentially the classical idea of what Ultra Instinct actually is without the transformation by achieving a balance of body and mind. Beerus essentially just lets his mind do whatever it wants by thinking about nothing but destruction, and Whis allows his body to do whatever it wants by not allowing his mind to interfere with his body's ability to move. So they are like exact opposite in that way. But in order for Goku and Vegeta to achieve perfect balance and really become fighters that are worth rivaling Beerus, they are essentially going to have to master what he hasn't yet, and that is essentially the idea of balancing your mind with your body. Now, earlier when I was talking about Beerus and Whis being a representation of the devil and the angel on your shoulders, I'm going to expand on that a little bit. So essentially the idea is that in order for you to naturally be a good person, you have to have a good nature, right? But the only way to become a better person if you have a wicked nature, like Sun Wukong originally did, is to essentially have control over your actions via your mind whenever your nature comes out as a result of your heart or your instincts or your ego causing you to act out as a result of your nature. So essentially the idea is if you give in to your mind and you just let it do whatever it wants, like Beerus, and perceive nothing but destruction exactly like Beerus, you're just going to be a destructive force of nature. But if you can tame that aspect of your nature like Goku does with his version of Ultra Instinct, you can allow the ego to do whatever it wants in combat as though you were a destructive force of nature, but you're essentially controlling it via your mind. In Journey to the West, whenever Sun Wukong acted out, the crown on his head would activate, and as a result, it would essentially serve the same role as you would normally use your mind for in terms of taming your wicked nature and your evil thoughts. So essentially, the crown is a stand-in for what Sun Wukong needs to practice doing whenever he has wicked thoughts. Anytime the crown tightens, that is practice for using his mind to tame his nature. And Goku, as a character who practices martial arts, Goku has mastered the art through Ultra Instinct of taming his nature. Essentially, when you see Goku use his true version of Ultra Instinct, when you see him take the stance that Grandpa Gohan taught him, brace himself for the battle, and essentially calm the mind despite the fact that the heart is going crazy and acting on its own, that's essentially Goku taking advantage of his ego in combat while also maintaining control over it via a calm and collective mind. And this is why Goku is essentially the ideal character. He's essentially a representation of martial arts in such a perfect way because the ideas of martial arts reflect the ideas of the moral practices that Journey to the West itself actually taught. So essentially, Bruce Lee, the way that he implemented a Ultra Instinct-like concept is he allowed his survival instincts, his fight or flight reflexes to do whatever it wanted. Rather than doing what classical Chinese martial artists used to do, he just allowed his fight or flight reflexes or his survival instincts to guide his movements in combat, and that created a more aggressive form of combat, a more aggressive form of Ultra Instinct, so to speak. And that is the result of Goku by nature being a destructive force of nature like the Saiyans, Vegeta, Beerus, etc., 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 and who he actually is on the inside starts to come out. But thanks to his training as an Earthling and his training as a martial artist and his training under Whis, he can control that aspect of his nature and fight as a martial artist with a calm and collective mind via Ultra Instinct. Now, one more really cool thing that I noticed about all of this is that the developments that Vegeta and Goku are going through are a reflection of what likely the angels, Whis, the gods of destruction, and Beerus all went through themselves as they've been training with each other and sort of having this rivalry between two techniques amongst the gods. Now, if you'll notice, whenever Whis gives Goku advice about Ultra Instinct and he tells him that he needs to learn a new set of moves and not just copy Whis, that is actually very, very likely a conclusion that Whis himself came to as a result of fighting people like Beerus, who use their mind to craft these masterful techniques in order to keep up with somebody like Whis, who uses Ultra Instinct. And so in order for the angels to surpass one another, in order for an Ultra Instinct user to become more efficient as an Ultra Instinct user, they have to ingrain these moves into their mind and then practice them so they become second nature when they use them with Ultra Instinct after ingraining these moves into their muscle memory. So that means that Whis has essentially been practicing what Beerus takes advantage of in order to become a better Ultra Instinct user. And then if you look at Beerus, he is actually practicing using meditation and the types of things that Goku and Whis use in order to put the moves that he's ingrained into his mind to use via Ultra Instinct. So essentially, at the end of the day, Whis and Beerus both represent a perfect balance of mind and body, and their overall role in the story is to make sure that Goku and Vegeta achieve this perfect balance of mind and body, because that's what you need in order to become an actual master martial artist.
Yeah, you've got to have both of them in order for it to work. You really do. You know, there was a lot of theories about Whis when he first appeared. Like, before we actually saw the movie, there was people who thought he was a Makaiyoshin or he was the real villain. Turns out that he's not. And I think Whis and Beerus are going to be around for quite some time. I'm not sure exactly where Goku and Vegeta are going to end up by the end of this thing, but no question that Goku is closer to Whis as far as philosophy of combat goes, and he's a bit more better-natured, whereas Vegeta's roots, although Vegeta and Beerus are not villains, that's not the point here, they definitely have a different source of power and a different source of motivation than Goku and Whis do. I've always liked that, and I think it makes the series more interesting, because if they were all the same, it'd be boring, but the fact that they're different, I kind of like that. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to a close. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.